makes a defeat so brutal? Is it the pain that a superhero suffers physically, or some deeper loss? And how brutal can things get when you combine those two? What could possibly be a greater defeat than the loss of Batman's parents? Well, how about the loss of his confidant, butler, and most importantly, lifelong father figure, Alfred? I don't think he gets much more brutal than this. While the death of Batman's parents, of course, is tragic, Alfred was there to help pick up the pieces and, in essence, help to raise the boy before his parents passed, and of course, thereafter. Alfred is probably one of the closest people to Batman, and was more of a parent to Bruce in the end than his own parents were able to be, due to them of course being taken away from him so many years ago. Alfred was shockingly killed by Bane after Bane kidnapped him. Bane made threats that if the heroes attempted to interfere, Alfred would pay the price. When Damien Wayne didn't take Bane's threats seriously and he set out to save Alfred, Bane made good on his promise and killed him. This was all part of a larger plan to break Batman again, but this time mentally and psychologically. What's the worst kind of defeat you can imagine for a hero to suffer? Is it something that's psychological? Is it something that's more physical? What do you think? I recently got caught up with the second season of Invincible. Episode 5 is out and Invincible is back, baby, in case you missed that announcement. And if you did, well, get ready to jump back in, it's so good. This episode really blew me away with just how brutal it was. This show and comic series both do an excellent job of creating both physical and emotional stakes for their characters. While I could talk about any of the memorable fights in the comic series, there are many, I want to give a special shout out to the fight between Alan and the Viltrumites. Now this happened earlier in the season in this show and goes down as well in Invincible issue number 23 pretty similarly, though not quite as drawn out I feel like as the animated version of it is. However, just like in the animated show, Alan does have his eyeball pop out and is left very much beat to a pulp on the verge of gruesome death. Oh boy, we're going to the Ultimate Universe for this next one, so you know it's gonna be brutal because Ultimates. It comes from the Ultimate X-Men series. Here, Sinister, who looks super different in this universe, FYI, in case you were wondering what's going on with that, infiltrates the X-Mansion and manages to sneak up on Charles Xavier himself. Despite his immense telepathic powers, Xavier here is no match for Sinister, who takes him out of the security room he was in, where he was seemingly surveying his students. Kinda creepy to be honest. When Charles asks Sinister where he's taking him, Sinister responds that he's escorting Xavier to his one true enemy, and then he pushes him down the stairs. Extremely rude and completely awful, yes. Xavier isn't the only one who gets brutally and honestly insultingly messed up by Sinister though in this fight. Angel also in this fight goes from being intimidating in one panel to psionically manipulated into choking himself in the next. Batman has lost a lot of Robins over the years and a lot of adopted sons. Damien Wayne was his natural heir, well, natural-ish. As natural as it gets till we get Helena Wayne in the main continuity, that is, if that ever even happens. Damien was the son of Bruce Wayne and Talia al Ghul. He was raised by Talia and the League of Assassins without Batman even knowing of his existence until years later when Talia basically just dropped him off on Bruce's doorstep declaring that Damien was his son. Initially, the two of course did not get along very well. Damien was stubborn in his ways and he insisted on killing as he'd been trained his whole life to do. But eventually he came around and he actually began to see the value in his father's approach to fighting crime, respecting it and even admiring it. Just as their relationship began to evolve into something more resembling a true father-son connection, Damien was tragically killed by the Heretic. A death that Batman can't even bring himself to avenge at the time when he realizes that the Heretic is Damien's clone. Following Damien's death, we also got Batman issue number 18 from this volume, an issue that focuses on the mourning of Damien's passing by being completely wordless. At the end of the Absolute Carnage event, Cletus Cassidy as Carnage gave Eddie Brock a choice between saving the world or saving his son. It wasn't a simple choice, but it was one that he simply had to make. Eddie ultimately had to choose, more specifically, between saving his son and letting the world fall victim to Null pretty much, or not saving his son and the world would probably still fall victim to Null anyway. But he wouldn't be the one who was more linked to this impending doom, at least in that scenario. Still though, clearly neither of these options are very good. In the end, Eddie of course chose to save Dylan, which ultimately led to the awakening and return of Null via Eddie Brock, who absorbed all the codices. This was a brutal defeat to read because Carnage just laid it all out and basically clarified that either way, Eddie was going to lose and Carnage would ultimately win, even if he didn't survive this fight. And even still somehow, Carnage did seemingly survive. Mera and Aquaman are often presented as being romantic partners and sometimes as a crime-fighting Atlantean duo as well. However, this doesn't mean that they never fight between themselves, and during the Blackest Night event, they actually had some good reason to. At that time, Aquaman had been possessed by the Black Lanterns, joining their forces, and Mera was driven into a rage by the death of the last standing family member, Tempest, causing her to become a Red Lantern. During one page in Green Lantern issue number 50 from the 2005 volume of this series, Mera takes on the deceased Arthur Curry, and when he attempts to win her over through what I can only describe as kinda weird, messed up empathy, I imagine trying to distract her from her rage by attempting to bond with her over the loss of their son. This, however, fails to work, and Mera frightens him off masterfully, responding, "I never wanted children," before seemingly killing them both with her blood, which as a Red Lantern was transformed at that time into liquid napalm, as all Red Lantern's blood is liquid napalm in case you didn't know that. While this clearly wasn't Arthur's most heroic moment in the comics, Aquaman is still usually considered a hero, which is why I'm still gonna count this one here. Also, it's a really brutal fight, I love talking about it. It doesn't get much more awful than this defeat here. This one happened as a greater part of the famous Daredevil story Born Again. In issue 227 of Daredevil, we are told the story appropriately titled Apocalypse. And indeed, if you are Matt Murdock in this story, I'm sure that you would certainly feel like an apocalypse of sorts was upon you. Here, Kingpin finds out Daredevil's secret identity and he uses it not to simply kill him, but instead to destroy his entire life. First, Kingpin comes for his law practice, making it seem as though Matt bribed a witness in his case. But it doesn't stop there. He comes for his finances, his sanity, and even blows up his apartment, and in the process destroys his costume. However, while DD is left feeling pretty defeated by this whole thing, he at least now has a name to pin this all on, seeing it all as the work of none other than Kingpin. This is going to hurt you a lot more than it does me. Famous words that come from the Joker before he brutally attacks Jason Todd with a crowbar. This all went down in the Batman story A Death in the Family. Fans at the time were able to vote on whether or not Jason Todd would live or would die. After the brutal attack on his life in issue 427 that ends with an explosion going off which buries his body in rubble, in issue number 428 we'd get our answer to this fateful question, and ultimately it would be established that Jason had in fact died. Although much later on we learned this actually wasn't quite true when he seemingly returned from the dead years later as the antagonist and anti-hero Red Hood, all because Superboy Prime basically punched reality. Ugh, this one made me cry just all over again. Every time I come back to it, it makes me cry. Okay, so here we're talking about the death of Spider-Man, which honestly happened more than once in the Ultimate comic book line and universe, but I do think this is actually the better death. This is Spider-Man's death done right, in my mind. If you have to do it, obviously, because I don't think many of us would really ask for something this heartbreaking, but here we are. Also, sometimes we need something heartbreaking because it makes us feel feels, and that's pretty cool. During Ultimate Spider-Man issue 159 through to 160, we see Peter in his final fight. Unmasked and with nothing really left to lose, he is forced to give it his all to protect the people of New York City, and more specifically his friends, his family, his loved ones, and the people of his own neighborhood. In the end, despite everything he does in this epic final fight, which spans multiple issues, he is defeated by the Green Goblin. And the ultimate version of the Green Goblin is an unstoppable force, and as we later find out, is also immortal, an immortal tank of a villain. This fight and defeat has it all though, ups, downs, it's an emotional, action-packed roller coaster. And while Spider-Man does seemingly die, so seemingly does Norman Osborn as well, in the end. So while a defeat, there's also some poetic justice felt in the end too. But goodness, Aunt May, boy do I feel for Aunt May here. Also in the end, I mean, both of these people would be fine as well, so they'd both survive. But in the moment, it was heart-wrenching, just trust. One of the most memorable and memeable lines from this superhero defeat and the Invincible animated series overall is, "Think, Mark." However, there is a more brutal line than that said by Omni-Man during this fight. One spoken when he suggests that he could kill Mark with his own hands and just make another child. Oh, he asks, "What 17 more years? My heart heart. As a Viltrumite, Omni-Man's lifespan is of course much longer than a human's, so 17 years is of course a brief span of time to him. This reduces the emotional connection he has built up with his son over the years to something that he deems as basically being seemingly meaningless, which is honestly just heartbreaking to watch, especially when you know how much Mark still loves his dad even through this whole messed up encounter, making the beating that Mark takes here just even more brutal. Nevertheless, we know that for Omni-Man, who does love his son, it's not that simple. Ultimately, while he does win the fight, he is unable to deliver the killing blow, which says it all, baby. That's about it. I've been your host, Amanda McKnight. Until next time, you stay nerdy, YouTube. Bye.